This is VOA Africa.
Hello, I'm Esther Githui-Ewart. It's Thursday, August 13th. This is Africa 54. Due to the global outbreak of COVID-19, Voice of America is taking every necessary precaution to safeguard its employees. So our broadcast will look a little different today and in the near future as we, out of an abundance of caution, reduce our staffing at VOA headquarters here in Washington. We're working to help keep you informed about what's going on, and we appreciate you staying with us on Africa 54. The French Foreign Ministry is advising its citizens to avoid going to Niger following the killing of 6 French aid workers and 2 Nigerians on Sunday. The action from France comes as Niger's government extends a regional state of emergency. Angela Okumadu reports.
Niger's government has extended the state of emergency to cover the entire region surrounding the capital, Niamey, after 6 French aid workers and 2 Nigerians were shot dead at the weekend. The group was ambushed by attackers on motorcycles as they drove through a giraffe reserve southeast of Niamey in the Tillaberi region. At a national security meeting on Monday night, Interior Minister Mohamed Bazoum said the reserve had been closed off.
We are suspending access there so that the current investigations can proceed unhindered. All defense and security forces are mobilized in order to find and deliver these criminals to justice.
A state of emergency had already been in place in parts of Tillaberi near the borders with Mali and Burkina Faso amid increasing jihadist violence across the Sahel. It has now been extended to cover the whole of Tillaberi, which does not include the capital, and empowers the government to impose security restrictions such as curfews and bans on motorcycles, the jihadists' most common means of transport.
Angela Okumadu of Reuters with that report. A few hundred miles north of Niamey in the Agadez region of Niger, where Amataltal is located, an area the size of France that borders Algeria, Libya and Chad, remains largely peaceful. According to Reuters, local leaders say a network of influential ex-rebels, clerics and peace committees formed in response to an armed uprising seeking greater political autonomy for Tuaregs in the 1990s has stopped jihadists gaining any traction by monitoring disputes and people with extreme ideas. Hannah Armstrong, an analyst at the International Crisis Group, says, quote, with the right leadership and the right relationships, you can have stability. Doctors are warning that the global death toll from diseases like tuberculosis, malaria, and HIV could increase sharply this year because of disruption to health services caused by the coronavirus pandemic. One report warns that malaria deaths in Africa could double in 2020. Henry Ridgewell reports from London.
Sibongile Zulu is among the 7.7 million South Africans who are HIV positive. She takes a cocktail of antiretroviral drugs to suppress the virus. When South Africa imposed a coronavirus lockdown in March, Zulu lost her job. Weeks later, her local clinic began to run short of some medication.
I think for 2 months, I was using only one that I was supposed to use 2. And if I don't use both of them, it's a big risk. And I can get sick.
Across the world, doctors say the coronavirus pandemic and the subsequent lockdowns will likely hamper the fight against other killer diseases like tuberculosis or TB, malaria and HIV. Epidemiologist Dr. Salim S. Abdul Karim advises the South African government on the coronavirus and has led research into other infectious diseases in Africa.
People are scared to go to healthcare services. We have seen a decline in the number of tests for tuberculosis. We've seen a decline in the number of patients coming in to get their medications. So that's of deep concern because it could undo the years of work that it has taken us to get to this point.
TB cases and deaths have fallen year on year in South Africa and many other countries, but it remains one of the world's biggest killers, with an estimated 1.5 million deaths last year.
We know there's a 50% decrease in TB testing in South Africa at the moment, so people are not able to go to the clinic or go to hospitals and so on, and they're not being diagnosed with TB. And this means that they can then transmit TB further to other people, so it's just going to sort of snowball.
Malaria deaths in Africa could double in 2020, warn researchers from Imperial College London, unless disrupted services such as mosquito net distribution and malaria treatments are maintained. Despite the dire forecasts, Karim says there is opportunity.
The opportunity to look at integration between COVID, HIV, TB, and other conditions, so that when we are investing for our coronavirus vigilance, we are benefiting not just the COVID epidemic, but the epidemics of HIV and TB as well.
The global community must look at the bigger picture, says McQuaid.
We stand to lose gains that we've been making in recent years, hard-fought gains that we've made, and we could be pushed back 5, 10, 20 years even.
Huge resources have been dedicated to the fight against the coronavirus. Doctors say it's vital that other deadly diseases are not neglected. Henry Ridgewell for VOA News, London.
As in many countries, the economic downturn in Spain caused by the COVID-19 pandemic is plunging many people into poverty. In this report narrated by Jonathan Spear, Alfonso Bito in Barcelona says migrants, whose numbers are growing in the midst of the health crisis, are among the most vulnerable.
They came to Spain looking for a better life, migrating from place to place, working in jobs that most Spaniards do not want. Their plight makes them vulnerable to abuse by unscrupulous employers, prompting activists to call on the Spanish government to legalize migrant workers.
We ask right now for this broad regularization to resolve the situation of these people who are already part of Spanish society, while as a society, we resolve the problem of an outdated foreign law that is not adapted to the needs of Spanish society or the current migratory movements.
The migrants not only work in agriculture, but also in jobs essential for coping with the coronavirus pandemic. Many are domestic workers, including those who care for the elderly. Rights organisations want Spain to sign Convention 189 of the International Labour Organization that protects domestic workers, an especially vulnerable group.
People in the homes are abusive because one is a migrant worker with no documents who is working illegally. So we know what it is to be in a precarious situation and what it is to feel out of place. And when women do not organize, what happens? One does not know one's rights.
Those who argue against legalising migrant workers, such as the right-wing Vox Party, point to Spain's high unemployment rate, more than 15%. They say legalisation would invite more migrants to come.
I understand the position of these entities that seek the good for all people, but the state does not forgive fines, does not forgive penalties, and enforces the laws from the king to his subjects like you and me alike. Immigration has to be legal and orderly, and we cannot make exceptions.
As Spain's economy continues to slide under the pressures of the pandemic, the tendency for employers to underpay or otherwise abuse undocumented workers is mounting. Yet the irregular situation of many of these immigrants means they have no choice but to accept the abuse. For Alfonso Beato in Barcelona, I'm John Spear, VOA News.
Face masks are making life a lot more difficult for one part of the population, people with hearing disabilities. They rely on lip reading and watching facial expressions to communicate with people who don't know sign language. But there is a solution. Maxim Moskalkov has our story.
Brenda Schertz leads the American Sign Language program at Cornell University. When the pandemic arrived, she hadn't anticipated that face masks would cause her so many problems. Deaf and mute from birth, Schertz realized everyday conversations with people wearing masks were almost impossible. Like Schertz, over 48 million Americans suffer from full or partial hearing loss and face the same problem.
communication can be done without speech in many ways, by using facial expressions, by using gesturing. And the mask suddenly blocks off that one route of communicating with people who do not use American Sign Language.
This makes a simple trip to a pharmacy or grocery store more difficult for people with hearing impairments. The pharmacists' faces are all covered by masks.
Those individuals who are working in stores, what I would say to them in terms of removing barriers is, if somebody is not responding to your verbal comments, be creative, be compassionate, be patient. Think about why that person might not be responding.
Anne McIntosh, full professor at the University of Maryland Global Campus, that is suffering from congenital deafness, has developed a special mask with a transparent plastic window, allowing a person's mouth to be seen. This is the first such mask that has been officially approved by FDA. The idea to make such a mask came to McIntosh many years ago, after she had to have an emergency C-section.
The nurse, the attending doctor, the anesthesiologist, and even my husband were all garbed up in surgical scrubs from head to toe, including a mask. And I was not able to lip read or follow along what was being said.
The little transparent window in the mask allows for lip reading and picking up on the person's facial expressions and emotions. Above all, these masks are needed in hospitals. Even before the pandemic, people with hearing impairments faced the problem of understanding doctors. But the current situation made things worse.
You could have an infant, a newborn there for several days, weeks, or even months. They've never seen a human smile because everybody had been masked up. So that really does affect the ability to bond with others, whether it's a caregiver.
According to the data provided by the World Health Organization, about 5% of the world's population, some 466 million people, have various forms of hearing impairments and could benefit greatly from masks that allow to see people's faces. Maxim Moskalko for VOA News, Washington.
Crackdowns against pro-democracy activists in Hong Kong took a very public turn this week. Authorities arrested a tabloid owner, marching him in front of cameras through the newspaper's printing operation in what has been widely decried as a blow to free speech. VOA's Arashar Basadi has more.
Tuesday's headline of the Apple Daily newspaper in Hong Kong. Apple Daily must fight on. Newsstand owner Judy Doe says sales of the tabloid are soaring.
Yesterday's news makes every young person want to read the Apple Daily, even the ones who don't buy newspapers.
The defiant headline comes after authorities arrested the newspaper's owner and media tycoon Jimmy Lai, who Monday became the highest-profile detainee under a new security law imposed by China. At a Beijing news conference, China's foreign minister praised Hong Kong's enforcement of a national law the government says targets those suspected of secession, terrorism, or collusion. Apple Daily customers say the new law is just a cover to repress pro-democracy voices in Hong Kong.
There were a lot of police officers raiding the newsroom. This situation is very serious and shouldn't have happened. So to support Apple Daily, I got in a cab and came straight to the newsstand.
Yesterday, the police brutally interfered with freedom of the press. All Hong Kongers with a conscience have to support the Apple Daily. Support Hong Kong.
Authorities detained the 71-year-old Lai on suspicion of collusion with foreign forces, a charge that could carry a punishment of life in prison. China's national security law was enacted in June. Western countries have condemned it. The Apple Daily printed more than 500,000 copies of its tabloid Tuesday, up fivefold from its normal daily press run of 100,000 copies. Arash Arabasadi, VOA News, Washington.
We're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Still to come, finding solutions to clean drinking water in the face of imminent global water shortages. We'll be right back.
Hello, I'm Linor Moudou, your VOA Health correspondent. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the World Health Organization says the best way to reduce your chances of being infected or spreading coronavirus is to wear a mask to avoid breathing any small liquid droplets which may contain the virus. Regularly wash your hands with soap and water or clean your hands with an alcohol-based hand sanitizer. For more information on COVID-19, visit who.int or contact your local or national health authorities.
Welcome back to Africa 54. The death of 46-year-old black man George Floyd in Minneapolis police custody in May triggered waves of protests across the United States and the world. New research shows how events in the U.S. drove debates surrounding race on social media across the globe. Here again is Henry Ridgwell.
Black Lives Matter protests erupted across the world following the death of George Floyd on May 25th, from London and cities across Britain to Paris, Berlin, Tokyo, Sydney and Auckland. The movement went far beyond the streets. It dominated cyberspace too. The US-based Pew Research Center has tracked the Twitter activity of lawmakers for the past 2 years in Britain, Canada, Australia and New Zealand. George Floyd's death and the Black Lives Matter protests drove online conversations around race.
Prior to George Floyd's killing, very few had used the phrase Black Lives Matter or hashtags related to that movement, only about 4%. And now we see that after George Floyd's killing, those who are weighing in on these topics shoots up to about half.
Continuing protests in the US prompted debates on domestic race relations in many other countries.
69% in Australia who were talking about George Floyd or the Black Lives Matter movement also began to talk about Indigenous people in their countries, the same with a majority of the legislators in New Zealand.
Almost 2/3 of all British lawmakers using Twitter posted messages about George Floyd or Black Lives Matter. Most tweeted support and solidarity for the protesters. Many used the Black Lives Matter hashtag to highlight perceived racial inequality in Britain.
The protest in solidarity, for instance, in the United Kingdom, personally, I don't think that's just about the US. It's also recognizing that this systemic racism exists here in the UK.
Around 1/3 of the surveyed legislators in Britain posted tweets critical of President Trump's handling of the protests. 20% of British lawmakers posted messages critical of the demonstrations, with right-leaning MPs far more likely to oppose them. Some lawmakers were critical of the protesters gathering despite the coronavirus pandemic.
Legislators were talking about the coronavirus in respect to the protests, but then also turned that conversation to the fact that non-white groups within the UK are suffering worse outcomes.
In the weeks since the death of George Floyd, statues of slave traders have been torn down, colonial histories are being rewritten, and demands for racial equality have become louder, amplified by social media. Henry Ridgwell for VOA News, London.
By 2025, half of the world's population, according to the World Health Organization, will be living in areas that are considered water-stressed. Several companies are offering solutions to clean and available drinking water by looking at what is in the air. VOA's Elizabeth Lee has the details.
This is no ordinary water cooler. The water here comes from the air. It's something Karthik Venkatasan would love his parents in India to have.
Whenever I go to India, I always use Dasani bottled water because I get sick if I use tap water.
Having access to clean drinking water is a growing global problem. Several companies have developed technology that uses moisture in the air and transforms it into drinking water. WaterGen's technology first purifies the air of particles. The air is then cooled until it reaches dew point. The water goes through another series of filters and an ultraviolet lamp to destroy microorganisms. These bigger machines have helped supply safe drinking water in countries including Sierra Leone and Vietnam, and also in the United States during disasters such as hurricanes. This smaller unit, called the Jenny for the home or office, can produce an average of 30 liters of water a day.
We need about 30% humidity for it to work. When you get up closer to 50, it works brilliantly.
Higher humidity also works better for atmospheric water solutions Aquaboy. Similarly, it creates drinking water while purifying the air and dehumidifying the room. Zero mass water produces drinking water from sunlight and air, even in places of low relative humidity, using these hydro panels. The technology uses solar energy to raise the dew point inside the hydro panels, creating condensation. The cost of these various products run from around $2,000 and up, which may cost too much for households in many regions in the world.
India and Africa are price-sensitive countries, so probably this price point may not work. But if the price point is right, definitely it has huge potential.
Creating drinking water from air, one solution that could alleviate one of the most basic human needs. Elizabeth Lee, VOA News.
New York City's famous Broadway shows were put on hold when the coronavirus pandemic hit the U.S., and though the bright signs with pictures of Aladdin and Lion King are still there, the actors and audiences won't come back into the beautiful halls to enjoy the performances until at least the winter of 2021. Evgeny Maslov has the story, narrated by Anna Rice.
Every year, more than 14 million people come to see one of New York City's famous Broadway shows. In 2019, these performances brought in well over $1.7 billion. But since March, the theaters have been empty, and Broadway could be facing a record-setting year-long break. Theater critic Michael Riedel believes the theaters won't spring back to life until there's a vaccine against COVID-19.
There was no possibility of Broadway or concerts or anything live, any live events coming back until there's a vaccine. One, the actors can't do it because how are you going to do Romeo and Juliet when they both have masks on? It's going to, kill the romance. The musicians do not want to be in the pit of an orchestra until they feel safe going there because, as you know, with the vaccine, if you're blowing on the flute, on the trombone, it's going to spread the virus. So they're not going to go back to work.
The most popular Broadway shows like Hamilton, Phantom of the Opera, and Lion King will likely survive the unprecedented break. But some of the less famous ones might have to close, and the sad process has already begun.
The biggest one is Frozen, which is the Broadway show that was frozen, but the pandemic is not gonna thaw. It's done. There are a couple others.
But even those that survive will have to adjust to the new reality. The industry will have to review its pricing policy and compensation to those who work behind the scenes, musicians, set and lighting designers.
You cannot reopen Broadway when there's a vaccine and say, hey, by the way, Hamilton's back on the boards and you pay $1,200 to see it. That's not going to happen. Ticket prices will have to come down to a reasonable level.
But how to do that is a tough question for industry leaders. One of the oldest theater companies, the Shubert Organization, owns 17 theaters on Broadway. They were forced to furlough a lot of their employees, but have proven resilient over time.
The Shubert Organization, which is the foundation of Broadway, the anchor of Broadway, that has survived. The Shuberts survived the Great Depression. They survived September 11th. They survived the collapse of New York City in the 1970s, when the city was perceived as so dangerous nobody would want to come here. They survived certainly Hurricane Sandy. They have survived everything.
Broadway isn't just about Broadway, but also New York City as well. The industry pumps money into the city and supports thousands of jobs. A vibrant theater industry funds hotels, restaurants, and stores near Times Square. For many, when Broadway comes back, New York City is back, with all its hustle, bustle, and shine. For Evgeny Maslov in New York, Anna Rice, VOA News.
Have you ever wondered where Washington, D.C. gets its singular good looks? A commission made up of experts in the arts has a say about almost every public building, monument and space in America's capital. VOA's Dora McQuarrie explains.
Washington is a monumental city, a showcase capital with iconic views. And that's because most planned public projects go through the Commission of Fine Arts, a presidentially appointed panel established by Congress in 1910.
The idea was to really lift the image of the city as an important international capital and to really push that idea of dignity and beauty and all these things that really contribute to the image of the city.
The panel guides the architectural development of Washington and advises the federal government on matters related to the arts and national symbols, such as medals and coins. One of its most recent high-profile projects is the new White House fence, which is in the process of being installed.
Basically almost doubling the size of the fence and give it some kind of blast and ram protection. So everything, all the pieces had to be beefed up.
And look good while doing it. Since the 2001 terror attacks, security is front and center.
You try to make it not look so much like it's there or find ways to make it feel like it's part of the visual environment. So it doesn't feel like you're going into a place that's really repellent. We actually work to try to make it still feel dignified and welcoming.
Pennsylvania Avenue used to be a busy main street in front of the White House. It was closed to traffic for security reasons in 1995. The Fine Arts Commission had a hand in making the secured area visually appealing. At the Lincoln Memorial, the reflecting pool serves as a security barrier, but visitors wouldn't know it. The same is true of the walkways leading to the Washington Monument.
It is perimeter security, but you don't really feel like it because it's actually a beautiful curving ramp that goes up to the monument itself.
Solar, storm drainage, and the urban landscape. These are some of the newest issues to come before the Commission. The needs change over the decades, but the Commission stays focused on maintaining a high-quality look so that the nation's capital never loses that special luster. In Washington, Dora McQuarrie, VOA News.
And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thank you for watching.